Hello. Oh, wonderful,
Hello.
great Lea Verou. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. So, for anyone who doesn't know who this wonderful person who I finally get to talk to again, it's been way too long. This is Lea Verou. She is a invited expert for the CSS Working Group or W3C. She's a TC39 delegate, and last but not least, she also runs and has her own research and consulting company. And finally, after it's been months actually. What was last time? I think it was like October, right? For
I think it
for
was JSConf.
yeah,
Was
JS
it
Conf.
JSConf?
Yeah, JS Conf North America. Yeah, is like the last time. Well, first off, that's the first time we met, and also the last time I saw you.
Yes,
And it
yes.
is a joy to like have you on this podcast. So, how are you today?
I'm good. It's the morning. I'm just starting my day. It's good.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Now, I know initially when I introduced you, I said, "Hey, you are a CSS Working Group invited expert for the W3C." For just getting into this podcast, and just first question right off. For those who don't know what an invited expert is, could you please elaborate on what exactly is an invited expert?
So there's this misconception that working groups design standards in a vacuum and then they hand them down to browsers on stone tablets to implement them. But that is not really how it works. Usually, web technologies are designed in collaboration with browsers. So most people in these groups that design CSS, HTML,
Mhm.
and JavaScript, especially CSS and HTML, JavaScript is kind of a special case.
Yeah.
Most of the people in these groups work at browser vendors.
Mhm.
And there are other companies that are W3C members and pay their yearly dues, and they can
Yeah.
send whoever they want to these groups. And then there are people who do not work for any of these companies, but have demonstrated that they're good at this.
Yeah.
So eventually they get invited to become an invited expert and help design web technologies together with these groups. It is a minority. Like I think the CSS working group has like maybe 10 invited experts or
Oh,
so.
wow. Oh my God. You're one of
Um,
what? That is
it,
amazing.
it's
Wow.
it changes, but I think it's around like that ballpark, plus minus
Okay.
a few.
Yeah.
Whereas like it's dozens of people from member companies.
Mhm.
So yeah, I design web technologies together with the group. Some of this work is funded by
Mhm.
companies that want to see a certain problem being solved.
Wow.
Probably the majority of it is not.
Wow. So wait, I mean, like, so what is that? Well, first off, like, second off, actually, really curious. So, what does it take to become an invited expert? I'm really curious. Like, how did that all come in? To follow up with that, like, how did that all come about? But I guess the first one, what does it take to become an invited expert?
It takes it takes contributing, and at some point, if your contributions are good, you get invited. Like
Mhm.
it's for me, it started back in like 2012 or so.
Wow.
Um, Back when the CSS working group was working with a mailing list, we did not use GitHub yet. Um,
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's much better now. Um, so I was using a mailing list for discussions, and I started like posting about certain things, certain proposals, and
Mhm.
like eventually I got enough cred that like I was being asked my opinion about things, and I got
Mm.
invited. That's
Oh, wow. That
it's yeah, that's it really.
so you're pretty good at this. Like, all right, please, like, would you like to be an invited expert? That's amazing. And so, um, I know also you have, like, I know I have a ton of questions, but I also know that what you've written a book as well too, correct?
Yeah, it was called CSS Secrets in
Okay.
2015.
Wow. Okay. That is. I need to pick. By the way, I have a question. Can I, like, if I order this, can I get like an autograph? Okay. When I.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
I'm not
Thank you.
sure if it's a good idea to buy it in 2026, though. I mean, I did write it in such a way that it wouldn't become outdated easily. And
Okay.
I think I succeeded in that. But still, if I were to write it today, there's so many things that are
Really?
new that I would like. It was written before CSS variables was a thing, for
Oh, yeah, you're
example.
right, because that was what, 2016, 27. It was like, what, I think, wasn't it like in 2015, wasn't like early stages, I thought?
It was
And then
early stages, but you could
early
not
sta
depend on them yet.
okay, gotcha, yeah, so, would you ever consider writing like a second edition or, up in a more updated version? Have you ever thought about that?
Oh, I've thought about it many times. My publisher really wants me to write another one because it went really well.
Of course they do. Of course.
Many people are asking for another one. It's just
Hmm.
finding the energy to like sit
It's a
down
lot.
and write a whole other book. Like
Yeah,
it's
that's a lot. That's a lot. Writing a book is a lot. I remember, like, being offered, like, to write one as well too at one point. Not for CSS, okay? It's for like a, for Vue framework and,
Mhm.
component library, Beautify. And so, like, I was like, oh man, like I had to actually say like, hey y'all, I don't think I could do this because you're right. It's a lot of work to write a book. And I mean, having the tangible example, like even just, I mean, even sure you have your outline and fleshing that out, but like just the technical content within itself and trying to, um, there's a lot to do. There's a lot, I think, within it. And yeah, and it's not just like, oh, okay, I'll sit down this, like it takes a lot of editing and a lot of, yeah, a whole lot. So that's amazing that you even wrote one and got it published. That is phenomenal. And yeah, second edition, if you do ever decide to write that, just know that you already have, one book sold. Just want to let you know that, okay?
Okay.
But looking at that as well too, I know that within this, I stated you will as well. You have your own research and consulting company, so you've consulted with like major companies and help influence, as especially being an invited CSS, invited expert for CSS Working Group, even a TC39 delegate. You've consulted with major companies and you've helped influence like our ecosystem, the developer ecosystem. Like, how do you think organizations, when I thought about this, you said that like, not all the research, not everything's funded. There's things that aren't funded and everything like that. Um, I'm curious to know, like, how do you think organizations can better support open standards in a lot of that community led, like innovation?
So I'm actually really glad you asked because this has been very top of mind recently. So there's basically the issue that right now, most standards are driven by very large companies, usually browsers, because smaller companies or even companies that don't specialize on the web, even if they're
Hmm.
big, um, they don't know how to get involved. The standards landscape has become so complicated and opaque that it's very hard to
Mm-hmm.
even know what to do and how to get involved.
Hmm.
There's a lot of misconceptions. Like people still think that designing and shipping a feature in all browsers takes like a decade. It doesn't anymore. There have been success stories where because someone was funded to do the work and was on top of it,
Hmm.
the feature went from conception to shipping across all browsers in 2 years. Like Cascade layers are an example of that, and that is a
Oh
fairly
wow,
substantial feature.
wow.
Like for smaller features,
Hmm.
it can sometimes be even less. I mean, yes, there is an element of risk. It does require some stars to align,
Hmm.
but generally, it is a misconception that it takes so long. And there's all these companies that live and breathe the web that depend on on the state of the web platform. And for example, like companies that produce products for web developers.
Hmm.
And they prefer to work around problems forever
Yeah.
than fixing them at the core because it is so
Hmm.
hard to know what to do and how to get involved. And like it just feels so futile. And
Hmm.
indeed, like at this point, the landscape has become very complex.
Hmm.
Like there is independent standards consultants
Hmm.
like me or like Florian or Miriam. Or like there are a few of
Hmm.
us that do independent standards work where a
Yeah.
company can go to and say like, I have this problem in the web platform. Can you solve it? And like, can you design a solution?
Oh.
Um, and sometimes that takes proposing a new solution. Sometimes it takes, oh, there's an existing solution, but no browser implements it yet. So it just takes championing
Mm,
that solution.
I see.
Sometimes, if they care enough, they might want to also like pay Galia to implement it in browsers
Mhm.
if they want to get it done fast. Like there are many different things.
I see.
But it is at this point it is so opaque that almost impossible for a company to know like who to go to. Which things do I go to Leah for? Which things do I go to Florian for? Which things
Mhm.
do I go to Miriam for? And so on.
Yeah.
Who are even these people? So we're actually working on like starting this effort, and we're not sure yet if it will be a collective, like a web platform collective,
I see.
or a foundation, like web platform foundation. I have the
Mhm.
domains for both.
Hey,
um,
alright, look. I love it.
but like we're still discussing like what the legal entity around it should be. But basically, something
Mhm.
where a company can go to and say, "I have this problem with the web platform, and this is my budget for solving that problem. Like, what can we do?
Mhm.
What are like." And we can advise them and like take care of like delegating the work to the right people,
Mhm.
like coming up with a plan, and basically taking care of all of that ourselves. Like not replacing any existing organizations, but sort of sitting as a higher level abstraction on top of them, like
Mhm.
taking care of distributing the work across the
See,
people, the consultants and organizations that
I see.
already exist. And if the company wants to eventually get involved in standards, we could do the work with them and sort of
Mhm,
like teach them along the way of like, this is how it works and this is
mhm.
how we propose something and this is how we move it forwards.
Oh, absolutely.
Because there is like, if you don't have the resources to devote like FTEs on that, it's very, very hard to just do it on the side.
Mhm,
That is actually exactly what we're trying to change. Um,
mhm.
right now we're still setting up the entity, but like if companies are interested in funding that kind of work, like
Mhm.
either I like your work, how can I fund it, or
Yeah.
I have this problem, let's solve it. Like they can just contact us directly, and like we can sort it among each other, among ourselves. Like even if
Mhm.
the entity doesn't exist yet, because it is very complex to set up an entity that for people that are everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Um, but we've had a lot of interest. Like we presented this sort of exploration at TPAC last year, which is a big standards event. Google went on the record to say that we support this effort.
That's
I've
amazing.
had conversations in private with other browser vendors that are also interested in supporting this effort
Mhm.
because they also see the value in getting more people involved, like both
Yeah.
on the standards design side.
Mhm.
Like we need this kind of work to be sustainable because like it is very difficult work. It is very impactful work. It takes
Yeah.
a very rare set of skills to do this type of work. Like
Mhm.
sometimes I say that standards are product on hard mode. Because yes, there's no component of like selling stuff. Like
Yeah.
the web platform's there. You can't avoid it. You don't have to sell it to anybody.
Yeah.
Um, but you're unable to change anything. You do not have any reliable telemetry.
Mhm.
Um, you have substitutes that don't work very well, and you're
Mhm.
trying to drive alignment across stakeholders that are in many different companies in many different countries and continents. Like this
Yep.
would make most product managers cry.
I mean, like that, already the complexities, even trying to manage a project, a multi across organizational like project inside like one company. I can only imagine across multiple companies, and not
Exactly.
only just talking about like not only just companies, but also like in different geographical like locations across the world as well too. So like there's a level that, and I mean, there's just layers of complexity. I think within all of that. So that is, yeah, that is very interesting. That is, wow, I'm very blown away by that. And, sort of even like, just bouncing off of that, I'm actually really curious. What is it like when it goes from, from proposal to implementation, but more so on the implementation part? Like, I'm curious to know, like, what's it like working with like the browser engines, right? Because I know you're probably talking with folks from like, who work on Chromium, talking to folks who work on, as I said, like Firefox. Was it is it Spider Engine? I can't remember. I can't
It
remember off the top of
is.
my head. Yeah, but like,
It
what's it?
does. It varies a lot depending on the feature and depending on the group. Like
Mhm,
different. So there is a priority of constituencies that says that web users are above web developers, and web developers are above browser engineers, and all
mhm,
three are above theoretical purity. So that is the principle that we try to follow, and all three groups subscribe to that. The CSS Working Group, WhatWig that defines HTML and the DOM, and TC39 that defines JavaScript, like the pure JavaScript,
yep,
the language JavaScript.
yeah,
Um, but in practice, each group has its own culture. Like in
mhm,
practice, I would say WhatWig prioritizes browser needs a lot more than the other
mhm,
two. Then the CSS working group is somewhere in the middle, and then TC39 is prioritizes sort of web developer needs more than implementers in some
hmm,
ways. I mean, implementer needs matter in all three cases because if you have a spec that cannot be implemented, it's fan fiction. It is not a real thing. Like web technologies materialize when they're implemented. If they can't be implemented, then they're not real.
yep,
So it is very important to take implementer needs into account, but how much you take them into account and how much are you willing to compromise? Because sometimes making a web technology more implementable does
mhm,
compromise its usability towards for web developers or the end results for web users that use the websites we produce.
I see.
Like for example, one of the trickiest cases of my career has probably been the CSS nesting syntax. So
Oh.
there was already a CSS nesting proposal by Tab,
Mhm.
and it was very much designed around certain implementation constraints. And I'm not going to go into like the details around compilers and parsing and how
Yeah.
parsing works, but
Mhm.
the syntax was very suboptimal and required authors to be typing a lot more than they needed to. Like,
Mm.
there is how much does the author need to type to communicate their intent? That is
Mm.
the actual signal. And
I
then
see.
anything else is boilerplate. Anything else that is needed for the implementation, ideally,
Mhm.
they should not have to do it. Ideally, the implementation should be able to infer anything that is not part of the user intent.
Yeah.
But the original CSS nesting proposal was not designed that way. It was designed where in a way that required authors to write a lot of boilerplate so that it was easier for browsers to parse it quickly.
Oh, interesting.
And that proposal sat dormant for like a decade or so because nobody was pushing it. We went through a period where we thought Houdini would do everything and we
I remember
wouldn't need to
Houdini.
add more.
What happened with Houdini? Sorry, I'm so sorry to cut you off. What
It's
happens with Houdini? Because I remember like that was like I was actually
It,
like
it's
diving into that.
still going, but we went through a period where we thought that we could stop adding features or as many features because Houdini would just do everything. And eventually we realized that no, Houdini will not do everything. We still need to add new features, especially when it comes to things that whose primary purpose is
Mhm.
making CSS more maintainable and more succinct. Like
Yeah.
you can't just do this with a custom add rule.
Yeah.
Um, and at some point, nesting appeared as the number one pain point in state of CSS. And browsers do pay a lot of attention to these surveys. That is why they fund them.
I see.
Um, and once nesting appeared at the top of the pain points of state of CSS, Google was very interested in implementing CSS nesting. So
Mm.
then this proposal came to light again. And me and Elika looked at it and we were like, this cannot ship. This is really bad syntax and this is going to be used all over the
Mm.
place. Like this is not something that authors are going to use here and there and that's it, like twice or three times in one file.
Would be
This
the
is going to
foundation
be
of like
used
your
all
like
over the place.
yeah, all over the place. I would use CSS nesting, and I know like for the
Exactly. Like,
longest time I was using less than SAS, and I'm like, no, I would actually just like a pure CSS alternative, No, no,
yeah,
not to like the amazing work that was less than SAS, right? But I just would like a less dependency, just a
yeah,
pure CSS
absolutely,
alternative. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and we looked at SAS and less style sheets, and it's like, look,
Hmm.
nesting is used all over the place when it's available. It
Yeah.
is very important that we get this right.
Hmm.
And we tried to, we found a compromise
Hmm.
which preserved the restrictions that because browsers at the time were like, no, this is a hard requirement. We are not going to
Mm.
implement anything that violates it.
I see.
So but we thought, okay, working within those constraints, what can we design
Hmm.
that is better than the current situation? Like maybe we can design a syntax that is still a little bit more explicit than is needed to declare intent, but
Hmm.
less so than the current thing. Because in some cases, like basically the difficulty was when the browser is parsing, how do you know when you have a declaration or a rule or a selector?
Hmm.
Like you don't want to have to parse the entire thing to know.
Yeah.
Like you want to know early on. But we figured like in many cases, like if it's a dot, it's a class name. If it's a hash, it's an ID. Like what are the actual cases where you don't know? There's very few cases. Like maybe the explicitness should only be required in those cases. So we designed this intermediate syntax. We got consensus on it. Um, which was still hard. Like it was one of the hardest things that the CSS working group had to decide on. There were like all
Yeah.
these options, and some people were trying to push options that would never get us all the way to the sort of North Star syntax.
I
Because
see.
our argument was that this syntax could evolve into the North Star syntax that preprocessors like SAS and LESS have.
Yep.
It's not there yet, but it could evolve into it if later the requirement could be lifted. And eventually we won. We got that option to be the intermediate CSS nesting syntax. Browsers implemented it.
Yep.
And then I was like, can we get further? Can we
Hmm.
get all the way to the North Star syntax?
Yep.
What would it take? Browsers were like, no way. Absolutely not. Knack. Like literally, I had a Chrome engineer say like, knack, we are not doing that ever. And I was like, but what if we could minimize the backtracking to like this very, very small and very unlikely subset of cases? Like, could that work?
Hmm.
And every browser at the time would tell me, no, we're not doing that. What Chrome said. Like I would ask other browser vendors and I'd be like, well, what Chrome said. And then at some point, one Chrome engineer, like, bless them, one Chrome
Mhm.
engineer was like, I'm going to try a variation of this idea.
Mhm.
And it worked, and it was
Oh, really?
performant. Yes,
Wow, that is
it was
amazing.
Anders.
Ooh, oh,
It was his name was Anders.
Anders. Oh, man. Have I heard of Anders?
And
Okay, let me
he
Google that.
tried that, and then suddenly the entire landscape changed because it's like, oh, now this is actually possible. This could actually work.
Mhm,
So once Chrome figured out that yes, we can do this,
mhm.
the other browsers were like, yeah, I guess we can do this. And that gave us the relaxed CSS nesting syntax that we have today. And I think some of the lessons are basically that when yes, it's important to iterate with browser vendors, but also when they say that something is impossible, it usually just means it's very hard. It doesn't mean it's impossible. And also, it is much easier to get people to move along a path they're already on than it is to get them to do all the way. So it was much easier once we were already halfway there and we had this intermediate syntax. It was much easier to ask, could we get further? Could we reduce even further, like the cases where you need to be explicit that you're nesting?
Mhm.
Um, but if I had proposed the relaxed nesting syntax from the beginning,
Yep.
oh, that was just a pipe dream. We're never going to do that. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Man, that's a wow. That is like I love like the history behind this. That is really, really interesting. So building off of that, I'm really curious to know, like, are there any, because it sounds, I mean, again, you're very heavily involved, right? I mean, you are an invited expert. Like, have there been any like CSS features or standards you've championed in particular that that you feel especially proud of, or maybe things like we all use today, like us folks like use today that like without even realizing that like, hey, you took a major role into like, into like working on or implementing.
There are many.
Oh,
I
please do
well,
tell.
I mean, I just mentioned the relaxed
Nesting.
nesting
Yeah,
syntax,
nesting. I was gonna say relaxed
uh,
nesting is definitely one.
but I think the second one I'm most proud of that has been implemented in all browsers is the relative color syntax.
Oh,
At the time, so I'm co-editor of CSS Color.
mhm,
And at the time, we were trying to figure out like how to implement functions that lighten and darken colors, CSS colors, and
mhm.
because that was very heavily used in preprocessors. But there are
Yeah.
so many different ways to lighten and darken colors, and we wanted to get it right. And it's like we do
Mm,
not have enough data to get it right.
I see.
So how about we expose this lower level knob that lets authors do it however they want, and then that buys us time. Like often making when you have a situation where complex things are not possible and
Mhm.
simple things are not easy, you often want to ship a solution that makes complex things possible first
Yeah.
before, and that buys you time to figure out how to make simple things easy or even what the simple things are. Because
Mhm,
often when you're defining web standards and products actually, you often don't know even what the simple things are that you want to make easy. Like it's not always immediately obvious. And making complex things possible first off removes one of the most pressing pain points because like when simple things are not easy, there is a way forwards. It's annoying and painful, and I hate friction as much as the next usability person, but at least there's a way forwards.
yeah.
When complex things, when things are not possible at all,
Mhm.
there is no way forwards, and that is
Yeah.
much more painful. That pain stays with you.
Mm,
So sometimes shipping solutions that make complex things possible first, like alleviates the pain a little bit, and that
mhm,
buys you more time to figure out what the simple things are and make them and how you can make them easy.
mhm,
So that was the idea that basically this is a very low level thing.
mhm.
It allows people to do color manipulations however they want.
It's
And
like the RGB, the OCH, L, like, oh, like, what exactly would that sorry, look at me, I'm
sorry, I curse of knowledge. So you know that CSS has multiple different ways to define colors. There's like RGB functions, there's
mhm.
hex colors, there's
Yep,
color keywords, there's
yep,
LCH and
yep.
LAB
Mhm.
and OKLCH and OKLA, and there's all sorts of different ways.
Yeah.
And often in design systems, you want to create variations. So you
Right.
want to like take a color that you don't necessarily know what color it is. Maybe it's in a variable, maybe it's current color,
Mhm,
and you want to make it lighter or darker.
mhm,
So CSS now has a syntax that instead of defining a color literally, like for example, this is an OKLCH color and has this lightness, this chroma, and this hue, you
mhm,
can say this is a color in whatever color space.
mhm.
Start from that color and then manipulate its hue, chroma, and lightness in that way. So you can basically make colors that reactively modify existing colors. So you can have like
Oh.
like a lighter variant of a color, a darker
Mhm,
variant of a color, and then when you change the variable of the
mhm.
original color,
Yeah.
everything adapts.
Oh, I see. So I see. So if we have like hex, for example, just map like hearing this properly, like if it's hex, for example, I change like that variation. Everything else it could be OCA, OCLA, K. Oh my gosh, OCLK, RGB, all that different stuff. Like those would inherently change
Yeah,
as
so
well too.
basically, you
In
you set a variable. This is my accent color, and
mhm.
then you can generate everything from that. Like,
That
oh,
is
you
amazing.
can have basically dynamic design tokens that are
I see. Yep.
generated from one core token instead of having to pre-specify everything.
Hmm.
And because you get the entire power of calc in
Yep.
those coordinates, like you can
Yep.
do anything. It's not just originally we were thinking, well, will people want to plus minus lightness or will they want to multiply with factors?
I see. Yep. Hmm.
Because there are use cases for both of these, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it doesn't restrict you those. Any math you can do in CSS, you can do. Like you
Yeah.
can clamp
Hmm.
coordinates. Like I want my lightness to
Yeah.
be between these boundaries.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Like you can do anything.
Yeah.
There were people have used it. So people have used relative color syntax for all sorts of things. Like for example,
I have.
emulating contrast color.
I was gonna say like
Um,
I definitely have.
yeah, these days I think it has become very, very common to use it in design systems exactly
Mhm.
because there's so many use cases, even beyond lighter and darker. Like
Yep.
people have used it to generate contrasting colors that
Mhm.
work well on a given background without having to know in advance what the
Yep.
background is.
Yep.
And
For yeah.
this is like one step towards my vision towards a more composable web where you can
Mhm.
integrate parts from different sources
Yep.
and have everything just adapt and have components be context aware and you drop them in a part of the page and they just adapt without you having to specify everything manually
Mhm.
or ideally like or specifying the fewest possible things manually. So
Mhm.
anything that cuts down the number of things you have to explicitly specify to integrate a component, I think that's a win.
Mm. I love that. I love that. I love that a lot. Yeah, it's funny enough actually, like, we use that in our design system at Harper for,
Mm.
like, our platform, Harper Fabric. So Fabric,
Nice.
yeah, so
So
it's,
there are actually
UUI.
improvements that are coming to this syntax. So there are use cases where you often need two colors
Mhm.
and you need a manipulation that involves two colors or multiple
Yes.
colors.
Yes.
So that I proposed that more recently, and I got an alignment from the group, and just the work just needs to be done. And again, like sometimes if nobody's funding this work, it's hard to get it done.
Mhm.
But we do have alignment to add to a two color syntax and eventually
Mhm.
generalize it, and also to add functions that extract these components. Because sometimes, like when you have relative color syntax, it couples the color with the manipulation. Sometimes you want them to be separate, like you want to have a variable that you do things with that extracts like the lightness of a color. Like maybe you
Yeah.
want to use a multiply blend mode in
Mhm.
for darker colors and a screen blend mode for lighter colors or
Mhm.
whatever. Like it is useful to be able to decide on things based on the coordinates of given colors.
Mhm. Yeah, so, man, that is, like, amazing, and now just even taking looking at the broader picture, your work spans a lot of different things from product design to, your community engagement, right? Because you've spoken quite a lot, and even outside of just speaking as well, right? So many other things. Standards, right? Tooling.
Yes.
How do you balance all of this? How do you balance like these multiple identities along with that too? You're like a researcher, you're a developer yourself, you teach, you're an advocate, you also are a product. There's a lot of hats that you wear that I'm sure it would not be able to fit. If I had like a rack, it wouldn't be able to fit on like my entire coat rack, the amount of hats that you wear. How do you manage that while it's also like maintaining that if you do have work-life balance, right? Maintaining like that work-life balance. Cause it again, being an invited expert, staying like at the forefront of things, that's one thing, right? Not only are you staying at the forefront, you're also defining the forefront of like a lot of like our ecosystem, right? You take part of that. You're a TC39 delegate. You also run your consulting and research agency, and that comes with its own list of things. And you also are still actively engaged in the community as well. How do you balance all of that?
Well, do keep in mind that some of that work is funded. Like
Mhm.
even though not all of it is, and a lot of it is still a labor of love, there is some
Yeah.
standards work that is funded.
Mhm.
Also, there is work around developer research that is funded. But I think, first off, I don't see these are as completely separate, as
Mm.
completely separate things. Like standards teach you a lot about product. Actually, I said this earlier about how
Yeah.
standards are product on hard mode. They
Oh, you're right. Yep.
not only do they share about 80%
Mhm.
of their core with product work, but also
Mhm.
that part that they share, that core that they shared, is on hard mode.
Mhm.
Um, so in some ways, standards are excellent preparation for doing product work. And similarly, like DevRel and research are very related to both standards and product work, because you do need to research user needs before you design anything. Like
Mhm.
you should not be designing any products or standards in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Um, so and then teaching is like anytime you build enough expertise in something, you often it is natural to want to share it with people and to
Mhm.
want to teach other people. So they do, like, even though it seems that they're very separate, like they
Mhm.
actually fit into each other and they actually influence each other. And I feel that they're actually kind of synergistic, like each of them helps the others.
Mhm.
And that is one of the reasons I decided to go independent, that it is very hard to find jobs at large companies that combine so many things. Like
I
often
see.
they try to shoehorn you in a specific, very narrow
Mhm.
field, and I don't think I would be happy just using 20% of myself.
I see.
Um,
Mm.
like my work, I love my work. My
Mhm.
work is very important to me. And you mentioned work life balance. I aspire to work life balance. Uh, But eventually I realized that, like, I've tried to do the thing where you strictly work from 9 to 5, and then at
Mhm.
5, you like turn off your computer and don't work. I've really
Yeah.
tried to do it. I was not happy. Like, I realized
Mm.
that what matters to me a lot is not about it's not about having balance in the sense of like I only work during business hours. It's about doing fulfilling work, doing
Mhm.
impactful work, doing meaningful work. And that matters a lot more to me than how long it takes and what hours it is. I mean, obviously, there is a certain balance that I also want to spend time with my family, and I can't be
Mhm.
working 24/7.
Yeah.
But it's a balance. Like,
Mhm.
I have realized eventually that, like, yeah, what primarily matters to me is what work I'm doing rather than how long I spend doing it.
I see. Okay. Got you. Mhm. And, one thing I did not bring up early on is, you have your doctorate. And I know you're like, "Ah, yes." And, like, you were at MIT, right? You received your was it doctorate at MIT, correct me if I'm wrong, right? And it was the
Yes, it
focus
was
was
at
on
MIT.
yeah, it was, human computer, interaction, correct me if I'm wrong.
Human computer
Um,
interaction is just a fancy academic term for usability. It's like usability is the
I
practice, and
see.
human computer interaction is advancing the field of usability.
I see. So, I guess there's usability and accessibility. I mean, I know those go hand in hand, but is there a major look at me, I'm really curious. I'm really good
They
or
do go hand in hand. I think accessibility in some ways is usability for a certain subset of users. Like
I
it
see,
does
okay.
share a lot. It does
Mhm.
share a lot with usability in the same way that, like, often we specialize usability into like different subfields. Like,
Mhm.
if you see it from like a sort of high level view,
Yeah,
accessibility is usability for people with disabilities, which is all of us
I see,
at
yep.
some point or another. Like, there's
Mhm.
also situational disabilities. If I'm using my laptop, eating a sandwich, I
Yeah.
am effectively the same at that moment as someone with only one hand. Um,
Mhm.
but then we also split it further, like usability for developers,
Mhm.
for programming languages, and we call that
Yep.
developer experience. Developer
Mhm.
experience is just usability for a subset of UIs and a subset of users. But
Yeah.
it's the same principles. It's the same empathy that
Mhm. Yeah.
helps you be good at either of these.
Mhm.
Um, so they do have a lot in common, but obviously when you specialize something and
Yep.
you carve out a subset of it, either you can also figure out principles that only apply to that subset. So it can be useful to do it.
Mhm. That's it. Yeah, and your focus actually was like, if correct me if I'm wrong, was language design in particular. So
Yes.
could you
So
please, Doctor Leah, Doctor Leah Verou, can you please elaborate on that in particular? For your PhD, for your like, during your doctorate. I mean, could you just elaborate on like you drew to again? It was like usability and language design as like your research interest. Can you elaborate on like what that all entailed during your time there?
So the actual subfield was called end user programming, and it's basically
Oh.
around making programming more accessible to a wider range of people, to
Hmm.
novices who are not programmers or who are learning programming. Um, and back then, the field, most research efforts in the field centered around these two directions. Like either you design programming languages that are more high level and are easier to learn,
Hmm.
or you design interfaces that expose the inner workings of a program in an existing programming language
Hmm.
in a way that is easier to comprehend for novices.
Hmm.
Um, and it generates code behind the scenes for them. Like
Yeah.
it was either one or both of these two. Like, for example, spreadsheets are the most popular end user programming system.
Yeah.
When spreadsheets are programming, and it's basically both a language, like the formula language, and an interface, the spreadsheet
Hmm.
interface.
Yeah.
Um, and it's basically it's considered the gold standard, like the most successful end user programming system, because you have all these people who are not programmers using it to do essentially algorithmic tasks.
Yep.
And that is also why, like reactive systems, reactive languages tend to be easier to understand. That's why
Mhm.
often people prefer to do things in CSS rather than JavaScript.
Yep.
It is not. It's not because of the syntax or anything. It's because CSS is reactive, so you don't have to manage like cleaning up after yourself, whereas
Hmm.
JavaScript is not.
Hmm.
So you have to manage like all the side effects yourself.
Yep.
Anyway, um, so back then it was these two directions, and it seemed that. Uh, it was more impactful to focus on designing languages,
Hmm.
because when you design UIs, you reach the ceiling pretty quickly. Like you eventually reach the limits of the UI, and you have to fall
Yeah.
back into code.
Hmm.
And most of these UIs often, a lot of these UIs, I center around teaching people how programming languages work. Like Scratch is an example of such a
Yep.
UI for
Yep.
children,
Yeah.
which teaches them basically how does a programming language work, but in a visual way. But
Hmm.
essentially, it's teaching them the same concepts. And then there's the
Hmm.
question of like, but can we simplify the underlying programming language?
Yep.
Um, and most of my research focused around like HTML seems to be the easiest structured language for humans.
Yeah.
Like because it has very little syntax. It has a very small. Uh, it has a very small very few syntax rules, and it's
Hmm.
mostly vocabulary. It's like
Yeah.
once you know what a tag is and what an attribute is, that's it. You've learned all the syntax of HTML, and then it's just about finding which element you need and which attributes you
Mm.
need.
I see.
So that makes it very appealing for novices.
Yeah.
And then so we wanted to figure out like how far can we push this? Like,
Hmm.
can you make entire applications with HTML and CSS without having to write any imperative code? But here's the thing: my research was before the AI revolution. The field has now AI has
Yeah.
steamrolled this field. I'm
Oh
glad I got my
man.
PhD when I did because
Yeah.
my research would have looked completely different if I was starting it now.
Hmm.
And I know that like there are many dangers and there are many issues around AI, but also as someone who spent 10 years doing this type of research
Yeah.
where we would see programming in natural language as the ultimate vision,
Yep.
but surely we can never get there in our lifetimes.
Hmm.
Surely. And now we're there. Like
I
I
know.
think that is amazing. Like
It really is. Yeah.
of how of what potential it gives people. Like it gives people the potential to make disposable apps just for their
Yep.
own needs.
Yep.
Something that was previously only reserved for developers, and
Hmm.
even for developers, it often didn't make economical sense. Like
Yeah.
if you wanted to make an app to teach your kids something, would
Hmm.
you spend the time to make it? Sometimes. Other
Hmm.
times it would be like, yeah, that's a lot of work and the value is not that big.
Yep.
Now that trade-off is the trade-off of impact over effort is completely different.
Yep.
Um, so I think that is very exciting. Like
Yeah.
it's we spent we spent decades. We've spent like at least like 70 years since we started with machine code,
Hmm.
trying to get a little bit closer to natural language with every new abstraction shift. Like first we started with machine language, then we went to assembly.
Hmm.
And it was a little bit easier for humans and a little bit more work for machines.
Yep.
Then we got programming languages, like the third generation of programming languages, which was a little bit closer, like actually a lot
Yeah.
closer to natural language and a lot further from machines than assembly.
Yep.
And even back then, actually, a lot of the arguments that you hear today
Yep.
against AI for programming
Hmm.
were exactly the same that assembly programmers were saying back then. Oh, but the code it generates is so bad. Oh, but it's
Yep.
bloated and slow.
Hmm.
You cannot trust what you didn't write yourself.
Yep.
Uh, like the craft is going away.
Hmm.
Like all of this is understandable. Like it happened back then as well. Then we got
Hmm.
fourth generation programming languages, even a little bit closer to natural language, but still,
Yep.
as long as there is a syntax, as long as there is a rigid syntax that you need to
Yep.
parse, I've
Hmm.
seen it with my eyes in user studies, how that excludes people who are
Hmm.
not programmers, who have not trained for years.
Yep.
And I've seen how it discourages people learning programming. Like
Hmm.
that is why you have all these interfaces like Scratch to basically teach you the concepts without the
Yep.
plague of syntax.
Hmm.
And what better to eliminate syntax than being able to just explain what you want done in your language? Like,
That's
I
phenomenal.
think the
Yeah.
potential this opens is just amazing.
It really is amazing. This reminds me of the time actually is funny after like the only time I've dipped into this like a couple times, right? Like, oh, I want to write my own compiler from scratch or there's that, but then actually work wise, actually, when I worked at Allstate, Allstate used for a lot of like their, voice automation, like voice XML or VXML. And,
Mhm.
like I had to build a lot of prototypes. I'm like, business was like, hey, can you build a prototype for this sort of like voice flow? And I'm like, all right, cool. But then eventually it just got really tedious. I'm like, as an engineer, how can I make how can I sort of like obfuscate this or sort of make this like a little bit more high level for business folks to actually go about and build out their own thing so they don't feel as intimidated or they're always having to rely on just, me, right? Because the pipeline, it would just sort of sometimes funnel down to whatever. I had to learn VXML, all that different stuff, and it funneled down to me. And I'm like, all right, how do I do this to make it easier for them to actually be able to empower them? And, for me, I actually took, I think it was like Google, was it Blockly? I think it's like Google Blockly or something like that,
Hmm.
or something along those lines. Whatever Google's open source, I think it's like a derivative of like Scratch or something along those lines. But I think it's called Google
There are
Blockly.
many.
Yeah,
Like Scratch was the
something.
first one, but there's
Yeah.
so many at this point. Like
So
my
yeah.
daughter plays with this game called Botsies, where you basically build a bot with Lego-like pieces, and then you
Hmm.
control it with a Scratch-like interface.
Yep.
Is
I'm familiar with that. Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Yeah, but long story short, like I ended up building out like a drag and drop interface to allow like the business or business folks to actually like, build out their own like voice sort of like flows and everything like that instead of them having to touch
nice.
VXML. And I thought that was like really awesome. So again, it's very higher level than like, a lot of stuff that you had to build up, but like it goes to show that when you think about this, right, when it comes to inherently like I know a lot of folks, you said like from the first generation, programming languages to like, fourth generation. Now we're like, like natural language process, like NL, being able to like, use like, hey, I want to build out like this sort of app, right? And it'll just like, boom, build this out for you, right? Sure, you want to make some modifications or whatever, but it goes to show the, like genuinely like, is the code as great as what it probably could be? To be quite frank with you, not really. It's not like the most beautiful code, but it does allow for that level of empowerment for folks to be able to move forward with being able to do what they genuinely would have a very hard time to do, or better yet, like, you know, like we just struggle to do, right? As you said, like, oh man, I want to build a game out for like my kids, or I don't know, I want to build a game or some educational game. It's like, don't get me wrong, it's going to be the most amazing game. No, but like you wouldn't have to hire someone and pay them like 100K or 200K. Like you can build out your own version of this, get as far as like get really far and sort of get that ideation and turn it into like like from that ideation like actually into like legitimate conception, and it's there, and you can look at the pros and cons of AI and how that's being used, but in a lot of different, and again, there's pros and cons I think with any sort of technology, right? But I think
Yeah.
specifically with this, like looking at that, the pro part is it allows regular folks and not have to dive into the weeds of like programming, not having to dive into like, oh man, I've got to learn JavaScript or Python or whatever it is, right? And it allows them to feel empowered to be able to do things where it would probably like, it would be honestly, it'd be a financial barrier and even a cognitive, not really a cognitive barrier, but like another sort of like the context that you'd have to undergo to be able to do those things. And a lot of the, nitpicky pieces is just, it's not there like it would be or like it was there, prior and everything like that to like this large trend. So it's really cool to see that actually,
Yeah.
as an engineer, don't get me wrong, please, the code, not that wonderful, but it is really great to see folks actually feel empowered to just say, hey, you know what, like I can truly like, build out something cool and I can show this to my, my kids or even like, my coworkers or whatever it is, right? Build out these prototypes or, and anyway, yeah, sorry, like just, I find it to
Oh
be
no,
So yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, so it's just really interesting to see like how so many folks have been able to just feel empowered to, really like build their build applications and just not have to go through that barrier of learning a programming language, right? Or okay, cool. Now that I've learned it, how do I put this all together to build something? And then and then from building it, all right, then you have deploying and everything. And so it's really cool to see a lot of folks who quite frankly, again, may not want to dive into the field to feel empowered to be able to build out applications.
Oh
And
yeah, absolutely. But even for programmers, I find that it adds a lot of value. Yes, maybe the code that it gives you up front is not what you would have written yourself, but
Mhm.
actually it is getting quite good. Like
Yeah.
with some iteration, with some
Mhm.
prompting, like with the right guidelines, like it is
Mhm.
getting really good.
Yeah.
And I think I see this huge divide in our field.
Mhm.
Like there some software engineers are very excited and others
Mhm.
are almost threatened by it.
Yeah.
And I think it's because
Yeah.
it's an identity issue. Like, do you see
Mhm.
yourself is your identity person who writes code or is your identity person who solves problems with software? Because if your
Mm.
identity is around solving problems with software, it is a time to be excited because
Yeah.
like it multiplies your ability to solve problems with software. Yes, you still
Yep.
have to do some work.
Mhm.
I don't think it is ever going to completely replace software engineers for anything substantial, production ready. Like, um, for
Yeah.
disposable apps that regular people can make, yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely, and I think that's great.
Yeah.
Because these people were not going to hire software engineers anyway.
Yeah.
They would just decide that
Yeah.
I guess I can't make this thing.
Mhm.
The vast majority of people do not dive in and learn JavaScript to make this thing that they want to make for their kid. They just decide that this thing does not exist.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
and so I think that it's great that it will make these things possible that were
Mhm.
previously not. But for actual like production grade applications, I think you'll probably still need humans in the loop always.
Oh,
It's just
absolutely.
that what they do shifts. Like
Mhm.
maybe it will shift more towards problem framing,
Mhm.
constraint articulation,
Mhm.
um, taste, or
Yeah.
validation rigor.
Yeah.
Like basically, instead of writing the code yourself, what are the skills that you have to develop to guide AI to write good code? And
Yep.
how do you validate that it's good code?
Mhm.
Which may also involve AI in the future. Like at this point, we're not quite there yet.
Yeah.
But maybe down the line, you need to guide AI to write the code and you need to guide AI to check the code. And like
Mhm.
maybe we reach a point where you never come into direct contact with the code, just like we don't come into direct contact with assembly today.
Yeah.
It's like many people push back on this because it's like, oh, it cannot be the new abstraction shift because it's not deterministic. But
Mhm.
determinism was never part of the definition of programming. It is just something
Mm.
like it happened to be that way because
Yeah.
all our languages were deterministic. But the
Mhm.
actual underlying user need is not determinism. Determinism is just a means to an end. The need is quality. The need is good
Mm.
code.
Yep.
And determinism is a means to an end. Determinism means that we can only we can check the code once
Mhm.
to make sure that it's good.
Yep.
But if we could trust that the code is good, we would
Mm.
not need determinism. It doesn't matter if the code is different every time if we can trust that it's good. We're
Mhm.
just not there yet. Like that
Yeah.
will probably take some more time. I'm not going to make predictions for how long because
Yeah.
reality has proven us completely wrong.
Yeah, so true. That is so true. Yeah, like, again, I love it. I think it's great. Currently, like even for like my day to day workflow, right? How do I leverage this to allow for me to even focus on like again from like the tedious things that I have to do, right? How can I leverage artificial intelligence even when it comes to programming to like for me to focus on like the true areas that may need like actual like problem solving based upon my experience and skill set, right? Um, and even more so, it's like, hey, if I could, streamline it to where it could write wonderful code very similar to how I'm not saying I write the best code, like, there's, I don't write perfect code. Okay. I'm not Martin Fowler, but, or some other amazing folks in our industry. But if I can write it to write code that's very beautiful, right? Because writing elegant code is an art within itself. If I can get it, trained to do, inherently that, right? I can then focus on other things that I personally want to focus on, right? Which is like, oh,
Exactly.
diving more into the internals of like how a lot of our different stuff, like how truly things work. For example, I think I brought this up maybe in another podcast. Like, hey, I want to like leverage AI to do a lot of like more of like my day to day work. Oh, well, then I can dive further into like our core like frame or the core of like Harper, right? Okay, cool. Like, hey, I want to build a database from scratch. Like, what goes into actually building a database? Like, I can leverage it to help build and improve my overall expertise, right, on a deeper technical level. And a lot of the higher level things I can, sort of hopefully at one point, I don't know when, it could be a year, could be 2 years, could be three, five, who
Yeah.
knows, right? But just offloading that to like sort of AI, not to obfuscate the fact that like, hey, that's all necessary, right? But it's like, I want to take the time that AI has given me back to dive further and deeper into like our field even more so, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And I think even though there's the widespread belief that like AI is kind of like end stage capitalism
yeah,
based
yeah,
because of who is running it, I think it also
hmm
has the potential to give a lot of power to the people. Like, what will
yeah,
minorities build if they're not constrained by
hmm
what will VCs fund?
yep,
For
that's true.
example,
That is so
uh,
true.
uh, what did I want to say? I forgot.
Oh yes, from VCs. Sorry, VCs. Like if minorities aren't constrained of like what VCs want to fund, and that's, I mean, yeah. Like, sorry, I'll build off of that. How about that? I'm going to build off of that because you're right. A lot of minorities, like a lot of folks, women and women and minorities just in general, like have trouble getting VC funding, right? Because it's like hey, you may not have the network or things along those lines. Like, oh, this sounds like a great idea, but it's like yeah, it's like you may have a wonderful implementation, you might have great user bases, but in terms of
Yes, and now people can build prototypes themselves, like without
Mhm.
needing to hire an entire team, which I think is fantastic. Also, it gives a lot of power to users that they
Mhm.
previously didn't have. For example, I use GitHub Desktop
Mhm.
for I think it has a wonderful interface around displaying and
Yeah.
staging commits. It has the Even though it's not the best Git client by any means, that
Mhm.
part of its interface is fantastic, and
Yeah.
it's enough to keep me there, even though the rest of it is a terrible Git client. Um, because they're clearly like not working on it anymore, but it is open
Mhm.
source.
Oh,
And
is it?
one of the big feature requests that thousands of users have been asking for is multiple windows for when you're working on multiple repos in parallel, like very, very common use
Mm.
case, right?
Uh-huh.
And it has not been implemented all these years. And recently I saw someone implementing it themselves with Claude Code. They were like,
Uh,
I just implemented this with Claude Code. I don't know if it's like up to standards for PR, but it works for me. It might work for you too. Here it is. It's like we get into, at least when it comes to open source software, we get to this point where like users are manipulating the software they're using for their own
mm.
needs.
Mhm.
Like, I think that's fantastic. I mean, it doesn't solve all problems. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
that now this is the end of product and the end of usability because users can just implement what they want, because users are not designers. Like,
Mhm.
there are studies where, for example, when it comes to terminal commands, users make more mistakes with their own shortcuts than they do with the original commands.
Yes.
Um, like, often what we say in the field is that users are the best people to tell you about the problems they face, but they're not product designers. They're not necessarily the right people to give you to tell you how to solve these problems. Um, I
Mhm.
mean, sometimes they might, but in general, there's no expect. It's You should not be expecting that, and you should not be just blindly implementing what solution the user proposed. Like, you should listen to the problem. What is the underlying problem? Um, and design a good solution for it, or potentially for that and other related problems.
Mhm. Man, that is amazing. Now, for sort of like my final question, right? Because I've really been enjoying this podcast. Actually, I'd ask you like 10,000 more questions, but I know
I
that
can talk a lot.
and I have a lot of questions to ask you, but for the sake of time and respecting your time, like my last question would be, what advice would you give to like someone early in their tech career who wants to combine like this deep technical mastery with community impact? Very similar to like, again, looking at your career, you have deep technical mastery, but also you've done amazing waves in our community. You have a lot of community impact. So is there anything in particular, any advice or tips you would give individuals early in their career to sort of, with those who've thought about going down this route, like, what tips do you have for folks wanting to go down this route?
So I think this question makes it sound like these are mutually exclusive, but actually I would
Mhm.
say they're even synergistic. Like, doing one also helps you do the other.
Mhm.
Like if you have community impact without technical mastery, that's just empty marketing. If you have mastery without
Mm.
community impact, it's invisible. Like if a tree
Mhm.
falls in the woods and nobody is there to hear it, did it actually happen? You know. Um, so I think if you shoot for mastery, but you actually are vocal about what you discover along the way, that basically gets you both. Like it's just about the mindset of like sharing things, not um, don't censor yourself and think, oh, nobody's interested in what I have to say. Oh no, everybody
Mhm.
knows this. No, they don't. Like nobody's interested in this. Yes, they are. Not everybody's interested in it because nobody's interested. There's no single thing that everybody's interested in. But I guarantee you, there are people who are interested in what you want to say and what you have
Mhm.
to say. And the more you get towards technical mastery, the more the people that don't already know what you want to say. Um, so as long as like you have this channel open and you share what you find, like these
Mhm.
work together. Because as you move towards technical mastery, you will have things to share with people. Like I guarantee you, it's about like most people just stop themselves and censor themselves and think it's either not worth it or they have nothing to say or something like that, and they basically talk themselves out of it,
Mhm.
which is a shame because they have
Mm.
really valuable things to share.
Mm. That is really interesting. Wow, that is great advice. That is really great advice.
And also find like I would say if you can post to the maximum, the biggest possible audience you can, because sometimes what you have to say, like maybe the people in a certain niche would not be interested, or maybe a certain group would not be interested, but others would be. So try to reach as many as you can. Like
Mm.
when I first started blogging, it was like in 2008 or so. I was still living in Greece,
Mhm.
and I started blogging in Greece. Now here's the thing with the Greek web development community, especially back then, like they were much more focused towards like things that existed in every browser and had existed for a very long time.
Mhm.
Like they were not interested in cutting edge things. They were not interested in upcoming things. It was like well established things. Even if something had shipped in every browser, but it was like recent, they would still not be interested. So I could not build an audience in Greece. And then
Mm.
at some point, thankfully, I did not decide to give up. I decided to start blogging in English. And
Mm, I see, okay.
that got a lot more interest, and I started being invited to conferences and things. But if I hadn't done that, and if I was still publishing in a much smaller group, and in my case it was a country, but like other times people post to different small groups. But like if I might still think that nobody's interested in what I have to say because nobody was interested in that group.
Yep.
But it turns out that if the group becomes the world, many people are interested.
I like that. I like that a lot. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Leah. It has been or Dr. Leah. All right. No, no, but thank you, Leah.
I'll never get used to it.
It has been an absolute joy having you on this podcast and just discussing so much about, I mean, specifically around like your community impact, and and also your impact on like just our developer ecosystem specifically within CSS, and just yeah, like thank you so much for taking time out of your day. It has been an absolute joy, and this can't be the last time we talk. Okay,
It
so
won't be. It won't
I,
be.
I
Thank you
definitely
so
won't. I
much.
definitely won't be.
Thank you so much as well. This was fun. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Well, I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you. I'll see you soon. So
You
thank
too.
you.
Bye.
Bye.